The German Shepherd wouldn't stop clawing at the door of a crumbling roadside motel. Neighbors thought it was madness, just a dog scratching wood in the middle of the night. But his paws tore deep grooves into the paint, his growls echoing down the rain-soaked street until people couldn't ignore it anymore. They called the police, fearing violence inside. When the door finally cracked open, the truth tumbled out. Two identical little girls, pale and trembling, unable to move their legs. What had happened to them? Where was their mother? And why did the dog seem to know before anyone else that something inside that room was horribly, terribly wrong? Before we start, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments. I'd love to see how far this story travels. The rain did not fall gently that night. It hurled itself at the town of Riverton, Ohio, with the fury of 1,000 unspoken storms. Streets glistened under the harsh glare of half-broken lamps, their light bending in watery halos. Water cascaded down rusting gutters and rattled against window panes of forgotten buildings, where no one lingered after dark. Beyond the main road, a cheap roadside motel sagged under years of neglect. Its cracked neon sign buzzed weakly, spelling out Moonlight Inn, though half the letters were dead, leaving only a ghostly "Ukting." It was in that motel, in a corner room where the wallpaper peeled like old scabs, that two young girls huddled together on a sagging mattress. Clara and Lily, identical twins of 7 years, had always been inseparable. They shared the same golden brown hair that curled into tangles when it rained, the same wide hazel eyes that seemed too large for their gaunt faces. Yet anyone who looked closely could tell them apart. Clara carried an anxious crease in her forehead, a little shadow of responsibility that no child should bear. Lily, though just as thin, had a spark in her expression, playful in ordinary times. But tonight that spark was dimmed, replaced by shallow breaths and trembling lips. The room smelled of mildew and cold rain leaking through a cracked window. Their small bodies shivered beneath thin blankets, legs stiff and heavy, as if pinned down by an invisible weight. Clara clutched an old flip phone in her hand, its plastic casing chipped. She had memorized the numbers once, because their mother insisted, "If anything bad happens, call 911. Don't hesitate." Tonight, her finger pressed the buttons with desperation. The call connected. A calm but steady female voice answered, practiced over decades of crisis. 911, what's your emergency? For a moment, Clara froze, her lips unable to form words. Her chest heaved, and she glanced at Lily, who whimpered beside her, clutching a stuffed bunny missing one eye. Clara swallowed the knot in her throat and forced the words out, her voice barely above a whisper. We can't move our legs. Mommy's gone." On the other end, Jennifer Wilson, a seasoned dispatcher of 43, straightened in her chair. She had worked the night shift for over 20 years, in a room lit by flickering fluorescent tubes and the dull glow of computer screens. Her colleagues joked she was carved from stone, always steady, always ready, but her heart still clenched each time a child's voice broke through the static. She scribbled notes on a pad out of habit, even as she signaled for a call trace. "Sweetheart, what's your name?" "Clara." The reply was fragile, laced with fear. A crack of thunder echoed through the line, followed by the faint sound of water dripping. "Clara, that's a beautiful name. Can you tell me where you are?" "We're in a room. It's blue. The paint's coming off. There's a flower pot broken by the steps." Clara's eyes darted to the door, remembering details their mother once mentioned. Jennifer typed furiously, the address appearing on her screen as the system triangulated the signal. She kept her voice warm. "You're being very brave. I'm sending some people to help. Do you hear the rain outside?" "Yes," Clara whispered. "It's loud. And cold. Lily says she can't feel her legs." Jennifer's pulse quickened. Medical emergency. Possible neglect. But she masked her worry. "Tell Lily she's very brave too. Can you stay on the line until help arrives?" Clara nodded, though the dispatcher could not see her. "Okay." Outside that crumbling motel, the storm continued to rage. But the night did not belong only to thunder and rain. It belonged to a dog. Ranger, a 4-year-old German shepherd, stood on the empty street with ears pricked high. His fur was thick, a coat of black and tan glistening with raindrops, muscles taut beneath. Ranger had seen war before most children in Riverton had even heard of it. Trained as a K-9 partner for the Marines, he had survived explosions, desert nights, and the sharp commands of men who trusted him with their lives. When his handler fell in Afghanistan, Ranger was retired and given to the care of another soldier, Ethan Cole, a 34-year-old Marine veteran who returned to Riverton with more scars than medals. Ethan often walked Ranger at night when sleep refused him. The storm didn't matter. The rain, in fact, kept his thoughts quiet. He wore an old leather jacket darkened by water, boots heavy from mud. His face bore lines deeper than his age, with a jaw that rarely relaxed and eyes that looked as though they were always scanning for threats. Ranger was his anchor, the one creature who still seemed to understand without words. That night, as they passed the derelict stretch near Moonlight Inn, Ranger froze. His nostrils flared, catching a scent sharp and unsettling. Sweat, sickness, fear. He growled low in his throat, tugging violently at the leash. Ethan frowned, following Ranger's gaze to the sagging building. "What is it, boy?" Ranger pulled harder, claws scraping pavement as he lunged toward one particular door with peeling blue paint. Then came the fury. He hurled his body against the doorframe, barking with such intensity that his voice cut through the storm. His paws raked the wood, leaving deep white scars across the damp surface. The sound echoed in the corridor like frantic drums. Inside, Clara flinched. Lily clutched the bunny tighter. "There's something outside," Clara whispered into the phone. Jennifer's voice remained calm. "It might be help arriving. Don't be afraid. Stay where you are." But to the neighbors of the motel, the noise was not comforting. One man, half drunk and irritated, opened his own door to shout, but froze at the sight of the German shepherd snarling at room 12. The dog's eyes burned with a purpose too sharp to ignore. The man backed away and dialed the police, muttering, "Something bad's happening here." Within minutes, 2 calls converged at the dispatch center. Clara's whisper of desperation and the neighbor's report of a crazed dog attacking a door. Jennifer connected the dots, her instincts tingling. She relayed the urgency to officers on duty. Meanwhile, Ethan tried to restrain Ranger, but the dog refused. His nails clattered against the soaked wood, each scratch louder than thunder. Ethan had seen Ranger like this only once before, when they uncovered a hidden bunker overseas filled with civilians. The memory tightened his chest. He knew better than to doubt the dog's instincts. "All right, buddy," he murmured, crouching low, rain dripping from his hair. "You want me to look?" "We'll look." The door rattled under Ranger's assault, but it remained locked. Ethan pressed his ear against it and heard something faint. Coughing, a muffled sob. His pulse spiked. He tried the handle stuck. "Hold on," he muttered, pulling a multi-tool from his pocket. Years in service had taught him doors were only as strong as the will behind them. He jammed the tool into the lock, twisting, pushing. Ranger barked louder, as if urging him on. Inside, Clara whispered, "Someone's here." "He's trying to open the door," Jennifer, still on the line, responded firmly. "That's okay, sweetheart. Stay calm. The right people are coming." The lock finally gave, the door creaking open with a protesting groan. Ranger surged inside first, tail stiff, nose scanning every corner. Ethan followed with caution. The sight wrenched his heart. 2 little girls lay curled on the bed, faces pale, limbs stiff. The room was colder than the hall, water seeping through the floorboards. A broken flower pot lay beside the door, soil scattered like ash. The girls' eyes widened at the sudden intrusion, but Ranger did not frighten them. Instead, he leapt onto the bed gently, curling beside them, emitting a low whine of concern. Lily reached out a trembling hand, resting it on his fur as if she had always known him. Ethan knelt, scanning their fragile forms. "It's okay. You're safe now. We'll get you help." Clara clutched the phone tighter, whispering into it. "There's a man here, and a dog." They're helping. Jennifer exhaled in relief, signaling the arriving paramedics with the confirmed location. "Good job, Clara. You did so well. Help is with you now." Outside, sirens began to wail, piercing the storm. The motel's broken neon flickered one last time, casting a sickly glow over the drenched street. And on that night, in that forgotten corner of Riverton, the story began, not with the arrival of the police, nor with the decisions of adults, but with the relentless pause of a German shepherd who refused to be silent when two children had no voice left. The rain had not softened when the first neighbor peeked from behind a cracked curtain at the Moonlight Inn. His name was Douglas "Doug" Price, a man in his late 50s with thinning gray hair plastered to his scalp from where the leaky roof above his window had soaked through. Doug was a factory worker once, 30 years at Riverton Steel before the plant closed, leaving him unemployed and bitter. Nights were often filled with the sour taste of cheap whiskey and regret, but tonight something cut through his fog. He heard the furious barking and clawing of a German shepherd echoing through the rain and down the narrow hallway. For a man who had grown up in a rough neighborhood, Doug recognized desperation in sound. He dialed the police with trembling fingers, muttering to himself that something wasn't right inside room 12. Another neighbor, Martha Jenkins, stepped into the hall as Doug hung up. Martha was a heavy-set woman in her late 40s, her auburn hair tied in a messy bun, wearing a faded housecoat decorated with daisies. She had come to Riverton after her divorce, raising two sons alone, and though they were now grown and gone, she still carried the instinct of a mother to investigate any cry in the night. Her face was lined not only from age, but from years of double shifts at the diner downtown. She leaned on the railing, squinting toward the source of the noise. "That dog's gone mad," she whispered, though in her gut she sensed it wasn't madness, but warning. She called the police as well, her voice insistent. "Something bad's happening. You better come quick." Down the street, the first responding officer eased his patrol car through the sheets of rain. Officer Raymond Carter, 39 years old, was known in Riverton for his broad shoulders and calm demeanor. He was African American, with close-cropped hair and a trimmed beard flecked with early silver. Ray had grown up in Riverton's South Side, the son of a school teacher and a postal worker, and his path into law enforcement was driven by an old childhood memory, his mother once shielding him during a drive-by shooting that rattled his block. That night, he decided he would one day wear a badge to protect families like his. Years later, the job had hardened him, but he had not lost the protective instinct. As his wipers fought to clear the windshield, dispatch relayed the overlapping reports. A distressed child's 911 call, and neighbors claiming a dog was tearing at a motel door. Meanwhile, inside room 12, Ethan crouched low beside the bed, his jacket dripping onto the warped wooden floor. He had set his multi-tool aside, breathing heavily after forcing the lock. His eyes scanned the two girls, Clara and Lily, whose bodies lay rigid under the thin blankets. Ranger had quieted now, his massive frame curled protectively on the mattress, nose pressed against Lily's damp hair, ears still twitching with alertness. The children clung to him without hesitation, their tiny fingers buried in his thick fur. Ethan saw the pallor of their lips, the stiffness of their limbs, and his combat-honed instinct screamed urgency. He spoke softly. "Help is coming." "You'll be all right," Clara's eyes, though glassy, locked on his. In that gaze, he recognized something achingly familiar, the weight of responsibility no child should bear. It reminded him of a boy he once met during deployment, a child who had led his younger siblings through rubble after an airstrike. Ethan shook the memory away, focusing on the present. He reached for the motel's thin quilt and wrapped it tighter around the girls, though it did little against the chill. Outside, the hallway had become a gathering of uneasy residents. Doug stood with arms crossed, his breath reeking of whiskey, muttering darkly about junkies and troublemakers. Martha glared at him, her protective instincts inflamed. "You think kids scratch doors like that?" she hissed. Their argument escalated just as the stairwell filled with the beams of flashlights. Officer Carter had arrived. His boots splashed through shallow puddles as he climbed, his radio crackling. "Everybody step back," Carter ordered firmly, his voice carrying the authority honed from 14 years on the force. He took one glance at the shredded door and the massive dog inside, then shifted his gaze to Ethan, who stood tall though weary, his dog tags glinting faintly beneath his soaked shirt. "Who are you?" Carter demanded, hand hovering near his holster, though he did not draw. "Ethan Cole," Former Marine. The kids were inside alone. Ethan gestured to the bed where the girls clung to Ranger. The officer stepped closer, shining his light across their faces. His expression hardened, but his tone softened. Two juveniles, medical distress. We'll need EMS now. He relayed the code into his radio, his clipped words professional yet edged with urgency. Minutes later, the whine of sirens cut through the storm. The paramedics arrived, pushing through the crowd of neighbors that had swelled despite the rain. Sophie Martinez, a Latina paramedic in her early 30s, led the way. She was lean, wiry, with dark hair pulled into a tight braid, her uniform soaked through at the shoulders. Sophie carried the resilience of someone who had grown up in a working-class barrio, where she often translated for her mother at hospitals as a child. That experience had driven her to emergency medicine. She had vowed no child would be left without help because their cries went unheard. Beside her strode David Thompson, her partner, a paramedic in his mid-40s with salt and pepper hair and weary eyes. David had 15 years on the job and carried himself with quiet steadiness. His back ached constantly, a souvenir from years of lifting gurneys, and he had buried one too many young patients. The scars of those memories haunted him, yet also fueled his determination. Tonight, seeing the German shepherd guarding two frail girls reignited that determination. Sophie knelt first at the bedside, gently brushing Clara's damp hair from her forehead. "Hey, sweetheart. I'm Sophie. We're going to take care of you." Her Spanish-accented English was soft, almost melodic. Clara blinked at her, but remained silent, too exhausted to respond. Lily whimpered faintly, clutching the one-eyed bunny tighter. David checked vitals with quick efficiency, noting fever, shallow breathing, and muscle rigidity. His eyes met Sophie's, grim. "They need transport now. Possible severe infection, hypothermia." Ranger growled low as the paramedics reached closer, his protective instincts flaring. Ethan laid a calming hand on the dog's head. "Easy, Ranger." "They're here to help." Ranger's growl subsided into a low whine, and he allowed Sophie to slip a thermometer under Clara's arm. In the hallway, neighbors craned their necks, whispering theories. Doug muttered about the mother being a drug addict. Martha shot him a look that could pierce steel. "Or maybe she's working herself to death while trying to raise them," she countered sharply. Their voices mingled with the hiss of rain and the clatter of medical equipment, weaving a backdrop of judgment and pity that would soon complicate everything. Officer Carter stood guard at the doorway, arms crossed, his presence steady. He had seen too many families fall apart, too many children caught in the cracks of poverty and neglect. Looking at Clara and Lily, he felt a heaviness settle in his chest. His own daughter was 9 years old, and in that moment, every protective instinct inside him sharpened. The paramedics lifted the girls gently onto gurneys, wrapping them in thermal blankets. Clara's eyes fluttered closed, but her small hand reached toward Ranger. The dog pressed his nose into her palm before Ethan gently pulled him back. "We'll follow," Ethan promised quietly. As the gurneys rolled out into the rain, red and blue lights painted the motel walls in fractured colors. The crowd dispersed reluctantly, some muttering, others silent, but all with eyes wide as though they had glimpsed something fragile and raw. Inside the ambulance, Sophie whispered reassurances to the twins while David secured IV lines. Outside, Ethan stood with Carter under the rain. "You live here?" Carter asked. "No," Ethan replied. "We were just passing." Ranger noticed something. Carter's gaze lingered on the dog, then shifted back to Ethan. "Sometimes animals see what we don't." "You did good," Marine Ethan said nothing, just rested a hand on Ranger's soaked fur. In his silence, he carried the weight of memories from battlefields far away, memories that told him he had once again stepped into a war zone of a different kind, the quiet war of children left unseen until a dog refused to be silent. The sirens faded as the ambulance screeched into Riverton General Hospital, the sliding doors bursting open to a wash of fluorescent light. Nurses and orderlies rushed forward, their shoes squeaking on the polished linoleum. Clara and Lily, bundled in thermal blankets, were rolled through the chaos of the emergency department. Ethan and Ranger followed close behind, their clothes soaked through, boots dripping onto the pristine floor. Ethan's jaw clenched as memories stirred. Too many nights carrying wounded Marines into field hospitals. The smell of antiseptic and fear forever etched into him. But this time, it wasn't soldiers on the stretchers. It was two fragile little girls. Dr. Rachel Morgan, the attending physician, stepped forward. In her mid-40s, Rachel was a tall woman with sharp cheekbones, short-cropped dark hair streaked with gray, and glasses that constantly slipped down her nose. She spoke quickly, her voice brisk, her tone commanding but not unkind. She had built her reputation in pediatric medicine after losing her own son to a rare illness years ago. That tragedy had hardened her into someone who fought fiercely for every child who came under her care. Now she barked orders to the team. IV fluids, cultures, blood work, broad-spectrum antibiotics, move! Her eyes flicked to Ethan briefly, recognition of a man accustomed to chaos, but her focus remained on the children. Beside her moved Nurse Margaret Hayes, a 65-year-old veteran of the hospital. Her posture was a little stooped from decades of work, but her hands were steady as steel. She had crow's feet etched deep into her skin, the kind of wrinkles earned by both laughter and grief. Margaret was 2 weeks from retirement, though she hadn't told many people she dreaded it. Nursing wasn't just her job, it was her identity, her calling. She'd raised 3 children alone after her husband died in a construction accident, and she had seen the way poverty tested dignity. That history had sharpened her instincts. She could read families not only by medical charts, but by the weight of their secrets. She bent close to Clara, gently brushing tangled hair from the girl's face. "Sweetheart, you're safe now." Her voice was warm, patient. Clara's lips trembled, but instead of asking for her mother, she whispered, "It hurts less when I don't move." Margaret caught the way Lily nodded faintly, her eyes too wise for 7 years. Dr. Morgan's initial assessment came quickly. Both girls were feverish, dehydrated, showing clear signs of severe infection. Their limbs were stiff, their stomachs slightly bloated, a sign of prolonged malnutrition. Margaret's chest tightened. She had seen this before in children left too long without proper meals, children who bore the silent marks of neglect. But then something strange. As she connected the IV, Margaret reached for the butterfly needle. Before she could comfort Lily with practiced words, Lily rolled up her sleeve herself and turned her face away. No flinch, no hesitation. Clara followed suit, murmuring softly, "It's better if you look the other way." The 2 girls handled the procedure with a composure far beyond their age. Margaret froze, her gaze flicking to Dr. Morgan, who caught it and frowned. This wasn't typical. Children fought needles, screamed, begged for distraction. These 2 moved with the ease of habit, as if hospital procedures were part of their everyday lives. "You've done this before, haven't you?" Margaret asked softly. Clara's tired eyes blinked up at her. "Mommy says we're her brave girls. Sometimes we help her when her hands shake." The words landed like stones in the room. Margaret glanced at the others, but they were busy with machines and charts. She leaned closer. "What do you help her with?" Lily whispered. "Her medicine." The one with the needles, she mimed, pushing a syringe. Margaret's stomach twisted. Whatever their mother was facing, it wasn't simple neglect. There was another story hiding beneath. Meanwhile, Ethan lingered near the corner, Ranger pressed to his leg. The Marine's sharp eyes scanned everything. The anxious paramedics briefing the doctors. The flicker of doubt on Margaret's face. The trembling lips of the girls. His instincts told him this wasn't just a medical case. Ranger, however, wasn't calm. The dog tugged suddenly toward a plastic evidence bag an officer had carried in from the motel. Detective Samuel Briggs, who had arrived from the precinct, placed the bag on the counter. Briggs was in his late 40s, stocky, with sandy hair thinning at the crown. He had the weary look of a man who had seen too many domestic disputes and overdoses to be surprised by much. He was known in Riverton for his cynicism, an investigator who always expected the worst in people. A childhood spent with an alcoholic father had left him distrustful of any parent who claimed to love their kids while putting them in danger. Inside the bag were the girls' few belongings, a threadbare blanket, the one-eared bunny, and a small cloth purse worn at the seams. Briggs jotted notes absently, muttering about charges of neglect once the mother was located. Ranger growled, his nose pressed hard against the purse. He scratched at it, claws raking against the plastic. The sound drew everyone's attention. "Hey, get that animal out of here," Briggs snapped. But Ethan's eyes narrowed. He knew Ranger too well to dismiss the reaction. "He smells something," Ethan said calmly, pulling the bag toward him despite Briggs's glare. Ranger clawed harder until Ethan finally opened the purse. Inside, hidden beneath tissues and crumbs, was a small glass vial label faded, containing residue of a thick amber liquid. Margaret's breath caught when she saw it. "That's not over the counter." She reached for the vial, her experienced eyes scanning it. Dr. Morgan leaned over, frowning. "Immunosuppressants, high grade. This isn't something a mother just buys off a pharmacy shelf. These are injections for chronic autoimmune disease." The room fell quiet, tension suddenly sharp. Briggs scribbled furiously. "So she's sick and still left her kids alone?" "That's worse," Margaret shook her head firmly. "Or it means she's fighting her own body every day while still trying to care for them." Her voice cracked with conviction. She knew too well what sacrifice looked like. Ethan's eyes lingered on the vial, then shifted to Clara and Lily. He knelt by their bedside, speaking low. "When your mom uses this, what do you do?" Clara whispered. "We count, so she doesn't get it wrong when her hands shake." Her eyes fluttered closed again. For Ethan, it was confirmation. These weren't careless children abandoned to chaos. They were small soldiers drafted into their mother's private war against illness. He straightened, jaw tight, as Briggs muttered about CPS intervention. Ranger whined, pressing his head against Ethan's hand, sensing his tension. Margaret's heart hammered. In that sterile room, beneath the harsh hum of fluorescent lights, the outlines of a deeper story began to take shape. This wasn't just about two neglected children. It was about a mother's hidden struggle, a system too rigid to understand sacrifice, and a truth clawing its way to the surface. Brought into the open not by paperwork or reports, but by a dog that refused to stay silent. The automatic doors of Riverton General hissed open, and a young woman stumbled in, rain still dripping from her hair and the sleeves of her navy blue factory uniform. Grace Thompson, 29, had wide brown eyes that darted anxiously around the waiting area, her cheeks flushed from running through the storm. Her uniform bore the faded insignia of the Riverton textile plant, the collar stained with oil and sweat. Her boots, cracked and worn, squelched with each hurried step. She was slight in frame, no taller than 5'4", but there was a wiry determination about her, the kind that came from years of shouldering burdens too heavy for one person. Grace's voice cracked as she gripped the reception counter. "My daughters Clara and Lily Thompson. Please tell me they're here. Someone said the police. The ambulance." Her breath broke, her trembling fingers clutching the counter so tightly the knuckles blanched. The receptionist glanced toward the cluster of figures gathered near the double doors to pediatrics. Officer Carter, Detective Briggs, and Nurse Margaret Hayes exchanged wary glances. Briggs adjusted his tie, lips thinning in satisfaction. "That must be her," he muttered. "The absentee mother." Grace pushed past before anyone could stop her, eyes wild, hair plastered to her forehead. "Where are they?" she demanded. "My girls, where?" Her voice faltered as she spotted the gurneys being wheeled into a private room. She bolted toward them, but Carter stepped in front, his tall frame blocking her path. "Ma'am," Carter said, calm but firm, "you need to slow down. The children are being treated." "They're my babies." Grace's voice shattered, raw with fear. "I had to work. There was no one else. Please, I need to see them." Briggs stepped up, his eyes hard. He was a man who had built his career on sniffing out neglect, and he thought he saw the signs painted all over her. "Funny, working late while your kids are starving in a motel room. Neighbors say you're gone most nights." "What do you call that?" His voice carried across the hallway, loud enough for the lingering crowd of curious staff and patients to hear. From the corner, Martha Jenkins, the neighbor from the motel who had followed in after giving her statement, spoke up, her voice sharp. "She's never home." "Those girls are alone all the time," Grace froze, shame flooding her face, her trembling hands balling into fists at her sides. She looked like someone standing on trial without a lawyer, outnumbered and already condemned. But then Ranger moved. The German shepherd had stood tense all evening, hackles raised at every unfamiliar figure. Now as Grace drew nearer, he gave a low, throaty whine. His tail flicked once, then again. He stepped forward, ears flattening not in aggression, but in recognition. To the shock of everyone in the hallway, the dog pressed his head against Grace's stomach, nudging her as though greeting an old friend. Grace dropped to her knees, her tears spilling freely as she wrapped her arms around Ranger's thick neck. "Good boy," she whispered, voice trembling. "You kept them safe, didn't you?" Ranger leaned into her embrace, licking the salt of her tears as if confirming the bond. Ethan, watching from a few feet away, folded his arms, his sharp eyes narrowing. Ranger did not give his trust easily, not to strangers, not even to most of Ethan's own friends. If Ranger had judged Grace harmless, then Ethan believed there was more to her story than Briggs wanted to see. Margaret Hayes, standing beside Dr. Rachel Morgan, took a step forward. Her nurse's instinct, sharpened across decades, caught the details others ignored. The stiff way Grace lowered herself to the floor, the wince she tried to mask when Ranger leaned his weight against her, the faint swelling around her knuckles that pulsed even in stillness. Margaret's heart clenched. She had seen that before. It wasn't laziness. It wasn't indifference. It was rheumatoid arthritis, an invisible battle tearing Grace apart from the inside. Dr. Morgan caught the glance Margaret gave her. Both women, seasoned in reading more than charts, recognized the same truth. Grace wasn't a reckless mother abandoning her children. She was a young woman hiding an illness, working herself to exhaustion, terrified of what would happen if anyone found out. Ethan's voice broke the tense silence. "You're sick, aren't you?" His tone wasn't accusing. It was steady, quiet, the voice of a man who had carried his own burdens and knew the weight when he saw it. Grace stiffened, her arms tightening around Ranger's neck. Her lips parted, but no words came. For a moment, she looked like a cornered animal, trapped between confession and survival. Briggs seized on her hesitation. "See? She won't even deny it. She's unfit." But Margaret stepped in, her voice slicing through the noise like a scalpel. "No, she's not unfit. She's unwell, and she's been trying to fight a disease while raising 2 children alone." She gestured toward Grace's trembling hands. "Look at her joints, Detective." "That's not neglect. That's pain." Grace's eyes flashed, defensive and broken all at once. If CPS knew, I'd lose them. They'd take my girls away." Her words cracked, her secrets spilled into the sterile hospital air. "So I worked double shifts. I skipped appointments. I stretched the medication. I thought I could hold everything together, but I couldn't. And now," her voice crumbled entirely, her forehead pressing against Ranger's fur as though drawing strength from him. For the first time, even Briggs hesitated. His pen hovered over his notebook, his expression conflicted. He had built his career on suspicion, but the raw desperation in Grace's confession pierced even his armor. Nurse Margaret placed a gentle hand on Grace's shoulder. "Hiding your illness didn't protect your daughters. It only put them at risk. But this," she nodded toward the twins' room, where their small forms lay curled under blankets. "This doesn't mean you don't love them. It means you've been carrying too much alone." Grace looked up at Margaret, her tear-streaked face reflecting a glimmer of hope. Ethan's steady gaze met hers as Ranger pressed closer, his silent loyalty a counter-argument to every accusation swirling around her. For the first time that night, Grace wasn't just the accused, she was seen. The courthouse in Riverton stood like a relic of another era, its stone columns weathered by decades of rain and wind, its wooden steps worn smooth by generations of weary feet. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension, every cough or shuffle of paper amplified by the acoustics of the high-ceiling chamber. Grace Thompson sat at the defendant's table, her posture stiff but fragile. Her factory uniform had been replaced by a plain dress borrowed from a neighbor, though the weariness in her eyes remained. She twisted her hands in her lap, knuckles swollen, as if her own body was reminding her how little strength she had left. Beside her sat Sophia Martinez, the Child Protective Services caseworker assigned to Clara and Lily's file. Sophia was in her late 30s, Latina, her sharp bob haircut perfectly framing a face marked by both professionalism and quiet compassion. She had entered CPS after years working in youth shelters, haunted by memories of children slipping through cracks. She carried herself with the burden of trying to balance protocol against the weight of individual stories. Yet today, her file on Grace seemed to drag her down more heavily than usual. Across the aisle, Judge Ellis, a woman in her early 60s with short silver hair and eyes as sharp as the black robe she wore, presided over the case. Ellis was known in Riverton for her strict adherence to law, but also for her capacity to surprise. Born into a family of coal miners, she had clawed her way through law school on scholarships and sheer determination, often saying that she judged with both the law in one hand and the memory of hardship in the other. Still, her gaze today was unreadable as she tapped a pen against the case file. Detective Briggs took the stand first. His testimony was clinical, almost cold, recounting the conditions in the motel, the neighbors' complaints, and Grace's admission of leaving the children alone. His words painted a bleak portrait: two minors in medical distress, mother absent, neighbors verifying repeated neglect. He avoided looking at Grace, his jaw tight, as though her frailty offended him. When it was Margaret Hayes' turn, the veteran nurse walked slowly but with dignity, her white hair pinned back, her glasses perched firmly on her nose. At 65, she carried the weight of 40 years in pediatrics, her voice steady as she spoke. "I've seen neglect. I've seen cruelty. This is neither. Grace Thompson is sick, and she has been hiding her illness to keep her daughters. Her children's knowledge of needles and medicine isn't evidence of abuse. It's evidence of a mother who tried to care for them while fighting a disease that robs her of strength daily." She turned, her gaze cutting across the room. If she were neglectful, those girls wouldn't cling to her name in their fevered dreams. They wouldn't call her mommy with that kind of devotion. Then Ethan stepped forward. His tall frame filled the witness stand, his military posture unmistakable. At 34, his face bore the lines of battles fought far from Riverton, but his voice was calm, steady, deliberate. "I've served in places where children were truly abandoned, where they had no one. Clara and Lily are not abandoned. They're loved. I know this because of the way Ranger reacted. That dog doesn't give trust lightly. He tore at that door because he knew two lives were trapped inside. And when Grace appeared, he calmed. He knew she belonged to them, and they to her. His words carried a gravity no cross-examination could undo." The courtroom quieted when Pastor Michael Williams was sworn in. Pastor Williams was in his early 50s, a tall African-American man with a kind face framed by graying curls. He had once been a nurse before a calling led him to ministry. His church ran a transitional housing program and had been quietly supporting families in crisis for years. "We have an apartment above our community center," he told the court, his baritone voice filling the chamber. "We're prepared to house Grace and her daughters during her recovery. With oversight from CPS, regular check-ins, and support from our congregation, these girls won't just survive, they'll thrive. Removing them into foster care would not serve their best interests when we can preserve their family with community help." Briggs bristled, but even he could not deny the clarity with which his support was presented. Still, he muttered about precedent and slippery slopes. The final piece came not from words but from evidence. Officer Carter submitted photographs of the motel door. The gouges carved deep into the wood by Ranger's claws spoke volumes. "If not for the dog," Carter testified, "those girls might not be alive today." His instincts brought neighbors to call, brought us there in time. This isn't just a story of neglect, it's a story of survival. Judge Ellis leaned back, tapping her pen again. She studied Grace, who sat pale and trembling but unbroken, her daughter's drawings tucked carefully in her lap as if they were talismans against judgment. For a long moment, silence reigned. Then the gavel came down lightly, not in anger, but in resolution. "This court does not take lightly the safety of children," Ellis began. "The facts show that Clara and Lily were in grave danger. But the facts also show a mother fighting an invisible war, a community willing to support her, and children whose bond with their parent is undeniable. To sever that bond would be to cause harm equal to, if not greater than, what has already been endured." Her voice softened slightly. "The court grants conditional custody to Grace Thompson. She and her daughters will reside in the transitional housing provided by Grace Community Church, under weekly CPS supervision and mandatory medical compliance. This arrangement will be reviewed in 30 days. The gavel struck again, final this time. Grace crumpled in her seat, sobbing quietly into her hands. Margaret reached to steady her, Ethan giving a small nod of solidarity. Even Sophia Martinez, hardened by years of protocol, felt her throat tighten as relief washed through the room. Outside, the gray clouds had broken, light pouring through as if Riverton itself exhaled. In the small park across from the courthouse, Clara and Lily sat on the grass with Ranger. The dog lay sprawled between them, his fur still damp from the rain. Clara whispered into his ear, "You saved us." Lily giggled, kissing his muzzle. "He's our hero." Ranger wagged his tail, content in the simplicity of a truth no court could deny. For Ethan, Margaret, and Grace, the day had proven something greater than law alone, that sometimes justice required more than punishment. It required compassion, the courage to look deeper, and the willingness to believe in redemption. Sometimes miracles don't come with thunder or lightning. Sometimes they arrive in the quiet form of a faithful dog's bark, a stranger's compassion, or a judge's willingness to see beyond the surface. In this story, it was not only medicine or law that saved Clara and Lily, but the unseen hand of God guiding hearts to act with courage and mercy. In our own lives, we may not face the same trials, yet every day we walk past hidden battles. A tired mother working 2 jobs, a child holding more pain than words, a neighbor silently carrying illness or grief. And sometimes God places us there, not by chance, but with purpose to notice, to care, to lift someone before it's too late. If you believe this story shows how God still works through ordinary people, I invite you to share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave your thoughts in the comments, tell us where you're watching from, and if this story touched your heart, please subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And before you go, take a moment to whisper a prayer, not just for Clara and Lily, but for every unseen family fighting their battles tonight. May the Lord bless you, protect your loved ones, and remind you that no act of love is ever wasted.